Shittiest seat on the best plane has better food. I can say that categorically, having flown so much in my life.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in the...
Yep. Yeah, Turkish Air was the secret. That was like some of the best food I've ever had on a flight before I started flying.
The other thing is, you can get the different countries' foods.
Yeah.
Right? You're not going to get a boring American food.
That's how I saw your name before it was available, because I flew a Delta flight that was a JAL code share, and they had a promotion where the movie was on JAL flights right as it was entering Japanese theaters and before it was in US theaters. In English. Yeah. Dubbed and subbed.
That can happen.
Yeah. It happens a lot with anime, and it doesn't seem to happen with anything else.
No, I think it happens whenever there's I guess it's only really a movie thing, right? But if there's anything that's released in a country and you go to that country and you might be able to get it before you get it in your home country.
Oh, yeah.
And if it happens to be a movie, like how many people from other countries, right? Like,
oh, no, but the difference was it was effectively streamed on JAL flights before it was available on non-in an airplane streaming platforms.
Right, but like someone in France, right? We might have, I don't know the timings of the releases on these things, right? But let's pretend that Spider-Man is already out in the US. Let's pretend it's not out in France till next week, right?
It would very likely not be...
If a French person gets their ass on a plane to America, they might be able to see it.
Very likely not. The Your Name thing was actually a kind of unique promotion. That is not common until after they're out of theaters and on a streaming service.
Whatever.
All right, we're live.
I've definitely seen... not free, but I've definitely seen pay money on plane to see movie that's out now.
True. That is I've seen that happen.
Yeah, it won't be free though. Not even on the ones that give you the free TV, right?
Actually, I've noticed business class flights, even fancy ones, are having less and less content to watch.
Well, it's weird. Back in the JetBlue was good days, right? When I was in college and whatnot, and after that, even I would always watch those. They had like Boomerang, they had like live satellite TV, and I'd watch cartoons and I watched sports on there.
I would do the same.
And then once I had like phones, headphones, devices, right? I basically turn off the plane television, except maybe occasionally I open up the map and then close it again.
You know where I turn them back on again now? The only case when I'm flying like 13, 14 hours to Singapore and I can watch something on the giant screen in my little sleep pod while I'm having dinner before I lay down in my private bed and sleep. All right, let's see. I closed my tab. All right, give me 1 second and then we're good to go. Stream's already live. I just got to reopen things, and they are reopened, and OBS is good. All right, put a little marker here. It's Thursday, June 15th, 2023. I'm Rim.
I'm Scott.
And this is Geek Nights. Tonight, we are talking about airplane food and airport food. Talking about some worst case food scenarios.
Did you say the right day?
I absolutely said the right day. I was studious about that. I even had a physical note I wrote with a pen on a piece of paper to remind me to say the right date.
I remembered. I'm like, make sure Rim says the right day, but I didn't remember to say anything before you said the day. It was just after you finished and the show started, I was like, oh wait, I remember. I was supposed to.
There were ancient times where we would record shows ahead more frequently, but that was back when, 1, we did shows 4 nights a week, ancient times, and 2, we were trying to emulate Penny Arcade, so we really didn't ever want to miss a show. So we would record extra shows in advance. We didn't have anything else
to do either. Not like right now. I got too many things to do. This week, nothing is really big. Have no travel or anything to interfere with the show. No sickness. Right? It just happens coincidentally that 2 events that I feel were valuable enough to one-time events that are valuable enough to cancel or delay Geek Nights.
Lined up with Tuesday and Thursday.
Exactly Tuesday and exactly Thursday.
Yep.
So we canceled Tuesday and we're going to record Thursday on Monday.
Yep. But we haven't done this in a while because for the last, I'd say 7 years, if we really couldn't do a show, we'd just bail on it. But didn't want to bail on 2 in a row, especially because as COVID is entering its long...
quite a bit lately, right? Let's we'll unveil here.
Yep. It's partly because, like you said, if I zoom out a little bit, it's almost like all the things I wasn't doing for the last 3 years because I guess something was happening are all coming back into my life. but they're almost like more things are happening. I have more things scheduled now in the year 2023 than I did in the first part of the year 2019 on a daily basis.
It's not conscious, but I am just lately doing things.
Yeah.
So.
And also our video game cup overfloweth like to crazy degrees.
I only got 2 video games right now.
Marvel Snap and Tears of the Kingdom.
I've pushed away all other video games except those 2.
I got 4. I got those 2 plus Overwatch and Fortnite.
I don't get forget that. All right.
Yep. So in one news, and we're not going to talk about it because you should just read the real news about it, but it's big enough to where I just got to mention it. The former guy, our piece of shit fascist former president, was arrested for the second time, this time on federal charges, like for real espionage act.
So the first one was not federal charges.
It was state charges, and it's ongoing. So he has an ongoing court case because he is accused of a huge number of felony like fraud counts by New York State.
Right. So this would be like if I robbed a convenience store, right?
Yep.
And then I did some smuggling of fireworks from like Tennessee to somewhere, right? And so one of them is crossing state borders, and that's a federal crime.
Yep.
Maybe I did just like I flew a plane in, smuggled some drugs into the country.
Yeah.
It's a federal crime, RICO Act, right? And then I also robbed a convenience store.
Yep.
So when I robbed the convenience store, the court in New York is going to be like, hey, that's like larceny or theft or some burglary, aggravated something, right? They'll probably get a whole list of charges, right? Beating up the convenience store guy.
You were hereby accused of aggravated something.
Right. And then so they're arresting me in New York. But meanwhile, there's some other law enforcement somewhere else who's like, hey, we saw that Scott robbed the convenience store, but he also smuggled drugs into the country. So we need to bring him to this other court also.
Yep.
And then it's like, let's say I get found guilty in both courts and they want like 1 year of jail each. It's like, I don't know which one I go to first, but it's like, you don't get to double up, right? I would have to be in like a federal prison for a year. And then as soon as I get out, New York would be there to collect me.
Yep.
Take me to the New York prison for the second year. And those crimes I mentioned obviously wouldn't be 1 year each. But that's the kind of scenario we could see here. If he's guilty on charges and counts in both cases, and who knows if even more cases.
Well, there are. So
Atlanta, right?
So yeah, there's a Georgia case which is around literally trying to steal the election, like for real, just in Georgia. Separately, there's the special counsel case of did he commit treason on January 6th and try to steal the election?
But the point is, if he gets multiple guilties from all around, right, all these sentences could pile up, and if he survives one sentence, then I don't know how they're going to decide who goes first, right? Which or whatever. But there could be a day where like, oh, Trump gets out of prison, and to another prison.
Well, so just the new case that he was arrested for on Tuesday.
That day could come.
So
we would hopefully live to see that day.
I watched Legal Eagle's like explanation of the indictment, and he was like, "This is like the most aggro indictment I have ever seen." Like it is making it clear that this is like there's even photos of the boxes like in all the different places in the indictment. Not even like in the case. They're in the indictment itself in black and white.
With my very limited, untrained, not lawyer legal knowledge, I'm pretty sure that any federal charges, they always have to have grand juries for federal charges. Yep. Isn't that right?
Yep. And in fact, the grand jury made the decision to indict, independent of what any prosecutor wanted to do.
Exactly. So I don't know, people who aren't in the U.S., I don't know if you have grand juries, but what they are is basically, you're going to have a trial. If someone's a criminal, you're going to have a trial to determine if they're guilty or not guilty.
Yep.
Right? Two sets of lawyers, all the evidence comes out, there's a judge, there's a jury, you present your case, you cross-examine the witnesses, and you get the other case.
And the jury has to basically be unanimous, and the jury is like, are you absolutely guilty, or is there doubt?
Right.
And you're
There's
not
always going to
guilty.
be a standard in the U.S. The standard for crimes is beyond reasonable doubt, right?
Yep.
Anyway, but there's a grand jury, and so it's for certain things. Before you do the regular trial, you have this grand jury where basically the prosecutors, right, the people who work for the government, right, the cops,
Yep.
the cop lawyer, right, gets a bunch of people together, normal people. And he's like, here's all the evidence I got about that former guy and the crimes he did, right? And he's basically like, do all you people think that I should go and try to have a real trial.
Yep.
Right?
Like, is it plausible?
And they say, right. They're like, it's basically sort of like, hey, if this was a real trial, do you think I could get a guilty? Right? Do you think, right? Should we press these charges? Which charges should we press? How about this one? Do you think he did that? Or do you think, right? And then the grand jury decides, what you can.
And it's a really important check, because this way, if someone is very likely not guilty, the grand jury's like, this case doesn't make sense. Yeah, then you don't even waste the person's time.
Government's time and money having a trial for that crime when you got that flimsy evidence. Get this out of here.
Yep. Right? Also, don't waste time of the person you're trying to indict, and don't slander them effectively by announcing this charge and then it just gets thrown out in court. It's a pretty good check. The fact that they got a grand jury to be like, wow.
Right. So when you get a grand jury to not only say, yes, you should do this trial, but to say yes to this huge pile of charges and counts, right, means that whatever they showed the grand jury, evidence-wise, must have been very convincing, and therefore it is also likely to be very convincing to a regular jury.
Yep. And the last thing I'll leave you all with is this one alone. The maximum sentence for these 37 charges and this one indictment is a little over 100 years in federal prison.
Yeah, don't do federal crimes.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes lately, I don't even know where I got it from or if I made it up, but as your lawyer, I advise you to not have done the things that you did.
That's right.
So
it's a federal crime. Don't do it.
In some other news, there's been a string of important, famous, or well-known people dying recently.
All right, so let's do some chronological order here, because we got goods and bads, right? Yep. So first one, right, sad news, the Iron Sheik. So if you don't know the Iron Sheik, he was a professional wrestler. His history, right, he came from Iran, right, back in the 70s, 80s, I forget the exact year, right? He was actually this really, his life story is pretty amazing. But, what he did in pro wrestling, at the time, it's he was just sort of, he started out as a good guy, but then he basically turned into the bad guy, right? Yeah. And I guess in some ways that, sort of stoked, right, some Islamophobia, right, at the time period, right? And Hulk Hogan was always playing his real American song with his American flags and shit, right? But it's Iron Sheik was really good at it, right? But over time, right, it's his contributions and his talents were more recognized. But of course, like anyone in pro wrestling, especially back in those days, his reward for his work was not great.
Most pro wrestlers, the reward for their work is dementia caused by head trauma and poverty.
Right. He was also, helped. There was a Twitter account that, he didn't run the Twitter account, guys, right? But the Twitter account, while it was A, funny, which is good, never hurts to be funny, but B, I think helped, promote his existence and appreciation of the person, even though he wasn't the one doing those tweets.
Yep.
Right? So, but yeah, he passed away. It's very sad. There's plenty of information if you want to learn about him. Okay. On the list of graves to drag your behind on, Pat Robertson, noted, I guess, I don't even want to say piece of shit, maybe pile of diarrhea. I don't know. So this dude was basically a right-wing Christian nut job.
He is almost personally responsible for the rise of the political religious right in America.
He is a significant contributor. He had this TV show, and basically on TV in a lot of places, on the weekend, he would just be sitting there, right? And all these Christian people would be watching him, right? And he would say all kinds of awful shit.
Really crazy stuff about witches are indoctrinating your kids. And
right. All that, everything that you think of as stereotypes of, well, not stereotypes, truth, right? Of right-wing Christian nutty people, Pokemon is the devil, D&D will do this, right? Gay people are all right. Every racist, every ist in the universe is embodied within this dude.
He poisoned a whole generation of American adults' minds.
Right. And now he's dead. Good. Obviously, I don't think there's a hell, but he believed in one. So, I hope he was right so that he could go there.
There's a culture book where there's a society that when someone dies, they copy their brain, and if they decide they were a bad person, they put them in a virtual hell forever.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I guess the third person, a sad story again, right? At the young age of 38, right? Ian McGinty has passed away. If you don't know who Ian McGinty is, he was a comic artist who also worked, on Adventure Time, being Puppy Cat, Invaders, right? Things you've heard of, right? And by all accounts, everyone I know who's ever, I guess, worked with him, talked to him, right? And I do know people who've worked with him. Basically, he was just like, one of those people that like everybody loves, like the greatest dude, right, ever. And he worked in comics, and his final tweet somehow poetically and soul-crushingly was like I just want to make comics with everybody, right?
Yep.
Like that kind of person. And is probably, I don't know his exact cause of death, but the discussions that people have been having online are basically like, yeah, obviously comics don't pay well, right? And this dude was like overworking himself, making lots and lots of comics.
And definitely every comic artist I know overworks themselves for almost no money.
Right. And I mean, there is valid criticism to be had. I wrote this in the forum of the comic publishers who do not compensate artists well. That's been true since comic books were a thing, right? Marvel was not, Jack Kirby. You can go all the way back. You can go further back than that, right? To find comic book artists in the U.S. and Japan and anywhere else. I guess maybe in France, you get okay with your bande dessinée, whatever. I don't know how they're compensated, but yeah, it's not the fact is that yes, the publishers aren't treating people well, but the reality is that there just isn't enough money to treat people well.
Yep.
Right?
And this is across the board everywhere, not just in comics. There's so many industries where society values something, but not individuals don't value it enough to pay much of anything for it. Think about all the people who are like,
if I tried to start a comic book publisher, the best one, I would just the nicest, does everything the cool, legit way. I treat my labor like the best way, right? I give them amazing deals, right? It's like, okay, so people buy comics, I get revenue. Well, I got to pay for the printing. I got to pay for the advertising. I got to pay for all the staff salaries, right? The editors, myself, of course. I'm not going to pay myself zero, right?
Yeah.
I'm not paying myself millions, though, like an evil person, just a regular amount, So we take all the costs out of doing business, right? Insurance, all the things you need for a business, the electricity. And then I take all the rest of the revenues from the comic book that sold, and I divide it fairly among the actual artists who worked on that book, right? Unless the book is some ridiculous, crazy bestseller, right? They're not going to be making a lot of money, right?
Yep.
It's just there just isn't that much money for there to be.
Look at us. Think about how many there's a video game.
Even if it sells really well, it won't be enough unless it sells extremely well.
Think about a video game that's pretty good, and you look at it and you think, you know what? If that were cheaper, like if it was $1, I might buy it.
Yep. So sad story, the passing of Ian McGinty. Okay, Not sad story again, right? Person who
I have a guess who the next one is. I haven't seen your list. But
there's a Mr. Noted Mathematician.
The FARC headline was famous mathematician has died.
Yeah, so if you weren't around in the 90s, you might not remember.
Or the 80s.
Yeah, but there was basically, this mystery. There's a Unabomber. They called him the Unabomber because he was sending bombs to like 2 universities, right? Like
universities and airlines. Like the CEO of an airline was killed by one of these.
True. So basically, someone just like sending bombs in the mail, and you like open up the mail and a bomb goes off, and many people were severely injured.
Yep.
And some people were literally killed by opening up, and there was a bomb, and it went off when they opened the thing.
And this was
worked.
Over the span of 17 years, he was getting away with this to the point that it was one of those things that like everyone in America knew about this guy and was low key, like either afraid of him or like would think about it a little bit when like a weird package showed up.
If you were in an airline, like an academic that might draw it similar to the other people who had received them, then you might be afraid and want to check your mail, right? Normal people weren't. It's like it wasn't gonna bomb, me.
Well, it was more that it was in the news a lot, so people had undue fear of him.
Because it's such a story, right? It's like people are getting bombs in the mail and dying. Where are they coming from, right?
And to get away with it for 17 years, and then the way he got caught was actually kind of nuts.
Yeah, it's like such a mystery, right? Like the Zodiac Killer mystery, or what's it, Jack the Ripper, the mystery. Who was it, right? who's doing this? We can tell by the evidence, by the patterns. It's definitely the same person doing this. It's a repeat offender, right? It's like, the same reason people love Silence of the Lambs. Like, this is like a real life.
But I think there's an extra weird thing. The thing that was going on that made this one scary to a lot of people was that, unlike most crazy stuff like this, most criminals aren't that careful or that good. There aren't like criminal masterminds out there who do everything right.
Who try to bomb things are not smart, and their bombs hurt themselves or don't work.
Yep.
Right?
Or like there's a fingerprint in them, or like, oh, this guy bought a bunch of nails. Like, all right.
It's very rare for someone to be good enough and evil enough, right? Usually someone who's smart enough to like make a bomb that can go through the mail and go off at the right time and work is a smart, intelligent person who could succeed in society and wouldn't do that.
Nope.
Right? It's very rare that you have this combination of evil and smart enough to do evil.
Yep. Possibly crazy, because the reasons he bombed were odd, shall we say. Like, this is not a documentary. You can watch a documentary or read Wikipedia if you want to know the full story.
When they caught him, it was like the biggest news. It was like all the news was talking about this for days and days and days. When they finally caught this guy,
And I remember, because I was in high school when like the trial was going to happen, and he just pled guilty. Like, he didn't try to hide any of it. When they caught him, he was like, "Yep, I was the Unabomber. Let's talk about why I bombed. Like, let's go."
Mm-hmm. F that guy.
Yep.
Right? He was a weird hermit in the woods. Interesting story for TV, but I think that often distracts people from the fact that no, that was an evil dude.
Yeah.
He died in prison, right? Where he wasn't going to get out of that prison ever anyway. So he was going to die there eventually.
Yep. He was 81. So.
Yeah. Okay. The next, right, we have someone I've heard of, which is the author Cormac McCarthy. I've heard many people talk about these books. I think some of them have been turned into movies, but you know what? I've never read them. Maybe
you never. I've read The Road. That's the only one.
I've heard of The Road. I know that is a book. I know that there is a book called The Road by Cormac McCarthy, and that is where my knowledge ends.
It's a lot of post-apocalyptic stuff cribs pretty heavily from it. Yeah, it's got some problems. Like, it's a fine book, and it broke some new ground, but it's also got some significant problems, is what I'm gonna say.
Okay. Well, regardless, this is a person who is making aforementioned bestsellers enough money to do well. Clearly a lot of people, had, very strong positive feelings towards many of his works. And I don't know anything else about it. It's just a huge famous person who's on the list of people who've died in like the last week. Right? So next, right, a really sad one, right? So John Romita Sr., if people don't know, right, Spider-Man was by Stan Lee, obviously, and Steve Ditko was the artist, right? Steve Ditko had a mysterious fight with Stan Lee, right? No one knows exactly what they fought over, but after so many issues of Spider-Man, they split, right? And Steve Ditko went to go be a hermit who hid away in an office writing libertarian weirdo comics.
That's a charitable way to describe that, but yeah.
Steve Ditko's amazing artist. And by all accounts, I guess according to Neil Gaiman and other people who've met him, like a nice guy to meet. I think he died a while ago, or is he still alive? I don't remember. But regardless,
have to look that up.
After Steve Ditko left Spider-Man, Stan Lee.
2018, he passed away.
Okay, I thought I remember him. But anyway, after Steve Ditko left Spider-Man, he's like, well, Spider-Man's the biggest thing since sliced bread in 1960, early 70s, whenever that was, right? I think it was only a few years in.
Yep. Meanwhile, noteworthy in the year 2023, the previous episode of Geek Nights, Spider-Man is still the biggest thing since sliced bread.
That's right. Spider-Man is the thing. Stan Lee's like, shit, I got to get someone to draw this Spider-Man, right?
I need someone to draw pictures of Spider-Man.
That's right. So he found this guy, right? John Romita. And John Romita was basically doing like romance comics over at DC, right? And if you look at his romance comics, like you can see why, whatever criticism you want to have of Stan Lee, right? It's like he was able to recognize that, you know, this guy who was doing romance comics in that style, right? You know, doing not so much the action, right, of the other comic artists, right? Or like the wild stuff like Jack Kirby was doing, right? But it's like that, you know, soap opera emotion is what Spider-Man needed, right? And so, and, you know, John Romita was just going to go and do like advertising work, right? And make a bunch of money. Stan Lee was like, I will pay you whatever they're going to pay you. I'll match the salary. Right? You're the guy. I need you to be the guy to draw the Spider-Man. All right. And John Romita Sr. went on to draw Spider-Man for like a very long time.
Didn't he also like he was part of the creation of Wolverine?
He was part of Mary Jane.
Yep.
Right?
Punisher.
Yeah. It's like this is an incredibly significant and important person in comics history in the US. And the thing is, it's like, you know, if you think about comic artists, right, it's like a lot of them have like a unique style to them, and you can sort of see their style. Like, oh, you know, you see like something that's all like a huge oil painting. It's like, oh, it's an Alex Ross, right? You see some wild thing. It's like, oh, that's a Bill Sienkiewicz over there, right? But it's like John Romita, the way he draws is like the default way. It's like, you know, everyone else, right, in comics, it was like remixing him. He was like the original. It's obviously he didn't invent Spider-Man, right? And to a certain extent, when he started out, he was trying to like, you know, maintain the same style that Ditko had started. But it's like you see like a picture of Spider-Man, and it's like that's what Spider-Man normally looks like. It's like, no, that's Spider-Man the way John Romita draws Spider-Man.
He just did it
the normal way, right? So to be that good at art that your way ends up being the defining way, like that's the default style that everyone else is building upon you, right? Is I think not appreciated enough.
Oh, he helped create Kingpin too.
Yeah. All these, right? It's like this is like ridiculous. And then so the other thing is that he had a child, right, who is known as JR, John Romita Jr., who also became perhaps an equally legendary comic artist, right? And is still alive. He went into dad's family business, right? So the Romita family is truly, you know, I don't think you would have, you know, I don't think you'd have any of the Marvel shit you got now, right? Disney wouldn't own it. There wouldn't be movies, right? It wouldn't have become as big, right? Because like, what if Stan Lee, after Ditko dropped out Spider-Man after a few years, right, had to get someone else who had some different style, right?
Instead of this like iconic, consistent style forming,
right? It's like would Spider-Man, you know, might have ended up just being a fad of the times, or it might have been a lesser intellectual property that comes and goes now and then, like a Transformers or My Little Pony level of, you know, instead of being a universally recognized thing. So very sad, the passing of John Romita, and I think those are all the people have died, but
which is amazing because somehow fucking Henry Kissinger is still alive.
Well, we can talk about that, but the thing I want to talk about is that a lot of these people who passed away, right, their ages were in 80s, 90s, right? Except for, you know, Ian McGinty, right? And so these people are boomers, right? And what we call them boomers because there was a baby boom. There was a period of time in America where more after the war, a lot of people made babies, more babies than at other times.
More babies than the previous generation and the following generations.
Right. So because a large portion, you know, if you look at how many people in the US are in a certain age, right, group, right, that's the biggest one. Except for the fact that now they're old, right? They're dying. But if there's more of them, you'll see more of them dying.
Oh, yeah. It's the biggest generation in American history. A high percentage of them are at the end of their ticket.
Right. So when they start dying, you will see more of them dying, you know, so a number of famous people that are in that category is also greater because presumably the number of famous people is evenly distributed across, you know, population. Right. So therefore, right, I think this is a trend that will just continue on a mathematical basis.
Yep.
Right. Is you are going to see more frequent celebrity death news of celebrities who are of that generation until they're all gone. And then the rate of celebrity death newses will decrease to match the population of Gen X.
And this is above and beyond
lower.
the usual, like, I'm 40, so most of the famous people I could name are probably about twice as old as me because they were an institution in my life up to this point. So they're all at the end of their tickets too. But this is now doubled by the baby boomer situation. I didn't even think about the boomers.
Yep. So that's it's bad because obviously, of the people we listed, several of them were good. It's not like you're a bad person just because you're that old.
Yep.
But it bodes well because overall, mathematically speaking, that generation of people leans politically in the direction we don't like.
Yep.
And if enough of them die and we don't, then that bodes well for election results.
Especially because that is a generation that has categorically held on to power and jobs and wealth more so than generations up to that point, to the point that's why Gen X was so fucked up, because they kind of got skipped over. Like, all the Gen Xers hit the top of their careers, and then some boomer was their boss who didn't retire, so they had nowhere to go. They couldn't be promoted.
Yep.
And then millennials came in, and it was still boomers.
So not only will the election results be swayed by these, mortality, but also, right, when those boomers die, they might have inheritors. It's likely. But even if they don't, right, that wealth goes to the state or wherever they willed it to go, some trust or organization or who knows. But at least it will be free of them, right?
Yep.
And there will be some increasing downward pressure of the wealth finally coming, it's like
a whale fall. When a whale,
from your cold dead hands, here we got it.
Yep. When a whale dies, it sinks to the bottom of the sea, and all those resources get redistributed.
Exactly. So it's that will benefit society in a hidden way.
Particularly when Kissinger finally bites it, because
I wonder.
WAPO just had an article that I'll link to because it's just great. But the title is just Henry Kissinger is turning 100. A long-running meme wishes otherwise, and it goes into detail about how millennials and younger hate Kissinger, and it's justified. Like, fuck him. So, I want to read it. Like, if you don't know, like,
I mean, if you want to talk about, we're talking about Trumpy crimes, right? It's like, you know what? Trump did a lot of crimes and deserves many consequences for those crimes and has damaged society greatly, right? But Kissinger did more of the war crimes, right? Crimes against humanity.
I mean,
Trump might have done some of those while he was in office.
Well, here we'll go easier.
Mostly he's done the financial crimes.
When
right?
W invaded Iraq for no reason, the second time, like when there was no reason to do it, tons of war crimes happened, and that was a horrible situation, and they should have been tried in The Hague. But at the same time, but at the same time...
Am I saying it right? Or you?
Yeah, Hague.
Okay.
I almost swallowed. I had like a phlegm. So
Hague.
The Hague. I
never heard of the Hague.
The
What's
haggis.
that?
But the collected war crimes of the U.S. Iraq invasion, as horrific as they were, pale in comparison to what happened because Henry Kissinger opened his fucking mouth. I'm going to read one short quote. I don't want to dwell on it because we want to get into the rest of the show. But this is a quote. You will never guess who said this. Once you've been to Cambodia, you'll never stop wanting to beat Henry Kissinger to death with your bare hands. You will never again be able to open a newspaper and read about that treacherous, prevaricating, murderous scumbag sitting down for a nice chat with Charlie Rose or attending some black tie affair for a new glossy magazine without choking. Witness what Henry did in Cambodia, the fruits of his genius for statesmanship, and you will never understand why he's not sitting in the dock at the Hague next to Milosevic. And that is a quote from Anthony Bourdain, the chef.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So he can't last that much longer. And he is like...
When you have money and power, that helps you last longer.
Like, at this point, I think only Vladimir Putin might be like a human being who is still alive, who has committed more total war crimes. Maybe there's got to be some
there's like a lot of really shitty dictators that people don't pay attention to.
True.
You get down to like Eritrea. Like the president of Eritrea is like the worst.
Yep.
Right?
Never mind Gaddafi. And even
Yeah.
Saddam Hussein did not deserve what happened to him, and Iraq shouldn't have been invaded, but he was still an absolute war criminal who deserved
He
something.
did lots of war crime.
Yep.
And I guess I don't know who you want to lay things on, like China and the Uyghurs and the whatnot.
But
right?
Kissinger, the most amazing thing is, despite the fact that he's turning 100, he seems to still 100% defend everything he did as moral and just and right, and fuck the haters.
All right, well, I mean, if you didn't change when you were 40, 50,
and you didn't change when you were 80.
Why would you ever expect someone to change when they're like 90, right?
You war crimed in your 40s, you didn't change it when you were 80, and now you're 100. Yeah, that machine is going straight on its course.
All right.
All right. I think I'll skip the next news and just do... But anyway, things of the day. So, play video games, play D&D, just know anything about history, and you know vaguely that slings are a thing. Call a rope, you can kind of swing it around, and you can throw a rock real hard with it, and you can throw that rock...
David and Goliath. Come on.
Yep. Or like any medieval or Roman military game where there's slinger units. Even Fantasy Empires had it had the halfling slingers was a unit you could recruit.
My very first second ed character, cleric, right? You couldn't use an edged weapon for some reason.
Had a club and a sling.
I had a sling.
And the most famous and prolific kind of sling in the world is probably the Balearic Sling, which is the one you're all imagining when you think of a sling. Other kinds of slings exist.
It's a couple strings and a piece of leather, and you put a rock in it, and you swing it around.
So it is an ancient thing, and there is you could spend your entire life studying just this one invention of humans, possibly even invented pre-human. That's the level of technology.
Monkeys made it?
A hominid prior to humans may have been involved because it was already...
A giraffe made one?
This was already...
A dinosaur? Dinosaur. T-Rex was out there like...
Total aside, but I was reading a paper making a strong argument that based on how archaeology has gone so far, a society about as advanced as humans pre-industrialization could have existed before the previous big cataclysm, and there would be no evidence of it for us to ever find.
It's possible.
It is possible. I'm not saying it's plausible or probable, but anyway, this video, in 6 minutes and 35 seconds, will actually explain how this thing works, and it's really, really cool how it works.
I mean, I thought I knew how it worked, but I guess I'll watch it and see if I'm wrong.
Yep. So it's got a trigger. It's kind of like a gun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I knew that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Most people I don't think know that.
All right, we'll see. We'll see if I'm right. I'm so far.
You might be. You and I are in the rare demographic of people who know more about this stuff than an average person, mostly because of video games and movies.
I guess so.
So what do you got?
Oh, so you've seen a lot of people, especially astrophotographers. They love to do this one shot where you do a time lapse, right, with a big wide angle lens. And you keep it completely still in a place that doesn't have light pollution. And what happens is at night, right? It's like you get, you see the sunrise, you see the sunset, and then you see the stars, right, up above. And then you see the Milky Way and everything move across the sky throughout the night. And it's not that the stars are moving. Oh, they are, but it's that the Earth is rotating.
Yeah.
Right?
Everything's moving anyway.
Right. So you're moving, and therefore you're looking at in a different direction in space, right? In I guess it's 180 degrees, right? Because until you get back to the sun again, right? And that's a very common time lapse that you see. But in those time lapses, right, the Earth is always just at the bottom, and whatever you're looking at, the cityscape, usually won't be a cityscape, but trees or a mountain, or right, will just be sitting there, right? And it'll change because the light will shine upon it and move, but it's sort of just a static bottom of the frame. So here, Art Universe Creative Astrophotography. Who's the photographer? Does it even say? Copyright Bartosz Wojcinski. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Bartosz. Had the genius idea. I've never seen this before, but it's sort of obvious once you think about it. But instead of locking the camera just on a tripod, which means it's stuck to the Earth, you arrange so that instead the camera is locked at a specific point in the sky, right? So now what you have is the same basic time lapse, but the sky doesn't move, right? The stars stay put, and instead you see the Earth rotating, right? And it's really fascinating to just, have this idea and then to see it executed and then just to see the night sky stuck in place, because really that is the thing that's stuck in place, right?
Yeah.
And then to see the Earth move, and I guess if you did this shot at different points in the Earth, the rotation would be different.
Yeah.
So
The closest I've seen people do this with like stunt tricks where they'll have a GoPro like mounted on their head pointing at their face. So the world moves around them, but they're always like locked, static, and standing upright.
Like if you did this at the North Pole, it would be like a static shot, basically. Like nothing would. But if you did this at the equator, it would be like really wild, right? It might make you dizzy if you so. Good job, Bartos.
Yeah. In the meta moment, the GeekNights Book Club was the Satanic Verses. It is now This Is How You Lose the Time War, as recommended to us.
Oh, I guess I have to make a post about
I guess you do. By one Bigelows Dickolas Wolfwood. Website's coming along. Scott's working on a bunch of stuff. I'm working on a much smaller list of things, and we're going to try to launch it. I'm not going to say any dates or schedules out loud on the show, but we've got some plans that are specific.
Yeah, by the way, you keep mentioning the person who recommended the Time War.
Because it's just a really funny name.
You should mention the authors, Amal El Motar. And
I would. I just didn't have it open in my tab. I'm just looking at the GeekNights website, and I went here because I hoped you'd made the post so I could just read the summary, but you didn't. So I had to improvise in a hurry.
Post, and that will help you remember.
It will.
Okay.
So I think otherwise, let's just get right into it, because airplane food and airline food and airport food.
This is our new low-effort Thursday idea when we don't have another Thursday idea, right? We already done so many food episodes, but we realized we can do this combo, food plus place, right?
Yep.
So last time we were going to do food plus stadium, but we ended up just doing stadium.
And that was already a long episode.
Right. So now Rim got the idea. We'll start with food plus airport. Maybe food plus stadium will come down the line.
Yeah. So one thing I got to, so this will be anecdotal mostly, but I can say that my opinions on this.
Expand it to food plus travel, so we could do train food also, or just do food airport?
I think we should just do airport, because train food is such.
And airplane.
Yes. Train food also is such a different experience, and I have a lot of very specific long-winded things to say about that.
Depends on the train too.
Yep.
Anyway.
But what I can say is that sometime between the 90s and the mid to late 2010s, airplane food just got an order of magnitude better, even at the bottom end. Like, I don't know what happened between food science or budgets or what, and I'm not saying it got good, but if you are too young to have ever eaten food, even in like business class or first class on a domestic American flight, before, like in the 90s or the 80s, it was basically poison.
Yeah, it used to be like a common joke, like, airline food, right? It's like, is awful. The same way that like you'd have that joke where like, kids, Brussels sprouts, ew, spinach, ew, right?
Yeah.
It's like, we know the reason that we like Brussels sprouts and spinach now is because they are literally not the same as what people were eating in the 50s and 60s.
And basically old food on old airlines, especially in the 80s and 90s, was basically the same as a TV dinner. If you don't know what that is, imagine the worst frozen food on earth.
Yeah. And so a lot of that is just, what's available in terms of food technology, right? It's like, we've invented a lot of, food processing techniques over, the time that we've had airplanes. And there's a lot of constraints when it comes to what kind of food can you have on a plane, right?
Yep.
How long is the flight? If the flight's longer, you need food that's going to be stable for the flight. You need a place on the plane, right, to keep the food, refrigerate or heat or whatever you're going to do to the food, right? It's like old planes couldn't really have a big fancy kitchen on there. We didn't invent that till, later.
Or even if we did, one, that's expensive. If you have a kitchen, like a real kitchen, one, how long is it going to take to cook food in it? And two, that's a bunch of seats you're not selling because you're taking up all that space.
Yeah, how many people are on the plane?
Never mind. You want to be a chef cooking with fire and then there's turbulence? So
right, we invented the microwave at some point. The airplanes are older than microwave ovens, I'm pretty sure.
Actually, so microwaves are really old, Scott. They can't.
Are they?
Yes.
Let's see. Invention of microwave oven. 76.
Yeah.
All right. Invention of airplane.
Well, invention of airplane versus
right, fine.
non-bespoke mass market transcontinental flights.
First commercial air flight was in 1914.
Yeah. Well, that was a different world. That was very rich people
But I
in
mean,
very dangerous planes.
But if you're putting the microwave in the 70s, there were definitely people just flying in the 50s, right? Or
Yep. And I don't know what airplane food was like in that era, but I imagine it was non-existent or it was just
even if you
snacks.
think about Casablanca, that movie came out in the 40s, and it was just portraying normal people flying. Right?
Yep.
So at least 30.
Well, normal, very rich people.
Yes, but that's still like 30 years between planes and microwave.
But also, flights couldn't be that long because you had to refuel. A lot of long flights would stop a bunch of times along the way to refuel.
Get more
and
food.
Passengers would get out and eat. The plane would refuel. They get back on. It would take off again.
Exactly. Yep.
But in the modern era, like in our era, 80s, 90s onward, it was basically just awful food until recently. So for most of my life until I'd say the 2010s, my rule was never fucking eat on a plane, ever. It's not worth it. Eat before you fly, eat after you fly, never eat on the plane.
Well, I think just due to circumstance, right? I didn't have too much experience with food on planes because almost all the flights that I took in the last millennium, the previous millennium, were short enough that there wasn't really like you weren't missing a meal on the flight to Florida, right? It's like and they would maybe bring a snack. You would just get something that was, a shelf-stable cookie, pretzel, right? A water.
Yep. Plus, remember, the TSA until September 11th didn't exist. So, like, when I flew in high school, you could just bring food and drink and anything you wanted on the plane. No one cared.
Yep. And I think the first time I ate airline food was on I flew to Israel, right? So in the year 2000. Yeah, so this millennium. And I don't remember what the food on the plane. That was not a concern.
Yeah.
And it was really long, so it wasn't. But
also, Scott, the microwave was invented for food production in 1946. I don't know where you got.
Was it on airplanes in 19? Was it something you could just?
I think it might have been too big to put on an airplane at that time.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, going to Israel, first long flight.
Yeah, I mean, that was it. That was the first time I had food on an airplane, and I don't remember it.
I think the longest flight I went on before I had a job that made me fly a lot, or when Scott and I started going to PAX's, was going to Florida for band stuff as a kid. But I didn't fly a ton, so flying was always such a special thing that like packing your own lunch or like eating a big meal and then going to the airport just always made sense. Like until my adult life, I wasn't like I was flying all the time. Like I couldn't afford that.
Yep.
So there was the era where Scott and I would fly a lot to PAX's, like going out to PAX West every year became a thing. And we specifically would always fly JetBlue because it used to be good. And their deal was they wouldn't have a meal on the plane. You could optionally pay for one, but it was a simple meal.
They added that eventually. Yeah.
And it was a simple meal. It was basically like a snack.
The meals that you could buy are basically adult Lunchables, right?
Yeah.
It's like things like crackers, cut up fruits, cheeses, a chocolate, some grapes, maybe a sandwich that was pre-prepared and refrigerated. Things along those lines that, really... now there wasn't any cooking involved. It wasn't like someone fried an egg for you or anything of that nature, right?
But that era, what we did, and it became a thing, is because JetBlue had a good terminal at our airport in JFK, they had actually, while overpriced, pretty good restaurants in that terminal, like above and beyond the food.
That was after they built the new terminal. There was the older terminal.
True.
It was not as good.
It was not as good, but it was...
Okay, so the thing with terminal food, right, is that the first thing you have to realize is that at least in the United States, right, which restaurants get to be in the terminals is not determined by how good their food is or anything of that nature, right? Because airports are like such a bureaucratic thing with the FAA and all sorts of other business going on, the person who gets to put a restaurant there is the person who is good at dealing with that bureaucracy, right?
Yep.
So a lot of it is like these food service companies that specialize in knowing how to get their restaurants in airports, right? And those aren't necessarily the ones with the best food. A lot of them are very cafeteria style, right?
I mean, the ones at LaGuardia or like the bad Delta terminal at JFK that's off in like that separate building, like it's just frozen. It's basically the same as airplane food.
Right. They want to put in, they don't care about how good the food is because there isn't really competition in there, right? They have this captive audience. You are in the terminal, right? If you are making like a transfer and you're in that terminal, you're going to have, if you want food, unless you got your own food, you're going to be eating at one of those places. You don't have time to leave and come back.
Yep. And because of the TSA, you couldn't bring your own lunch.
Right. So as a captive audience, you're going to buy one of these foods. So we're going to charge you as much as we can for the cheapest food that we can and just do what we have to do to get away with that.
Yep.
Now, you could, if you're like smart, eat and then go to the airport, right? The problem is that even if we got rid of TSA and everything, there would still be like this waiting that happens. Like you're not showing up 5 minutes before your flight. That's not happening, right? So even if you ate in advance, it's like, there might be like this time period where it's like, some people, I think a lot of people, it's like you're going to want to eat something before you get on the plane, at least a snack, right? And they can get you at the snack bar.
Yep,
right?
because the snacks in the airport are crazy expensive and also bad and limited.
Right. It's like, even if you want to buy something totally safe, right? It's like, you want to buy a bag of peanut M&M that normally costs at most $1.25.
Like $7-8.
Right. You're talking about movie theaters, captive audience, right? It's like, this is worse than that.
And the selection's so limited. I remember I was in Chicago for some reason. Me and Emily were, it was for a wedding. So we're in Chicago. Yeah, we're flying. We want to drink something other than water, like we like a beverage, and we don't want something alcoholic. And I canvassed the entire terminal. There was no beverage I could buy that was not an artificially sweetened like soda type thing, a sweetened tea with like high fructose corn syrup in it, or alcohol. There was no juice. There was nothing. There was no unsweetened tea anywhere.
It's usually an orange juice, at least.
There was.
That's of course that's a bunch of sugar, but still.
Yeah, it was awful, and there was nothing. So
usually, if you go to the place, there'll be a place that has coffee. You can usually get tea from them.
Yeah, they did not
throw a crappy tea bag in it. Right?
Yep, but even they didn't. They had like pod tea that had sugar in it already.
Interesting.
Like I was really mad about it, and I was mad about it for like a month because it stuck in my craw.
You're mad about it because you're hungry.
I was hungry and thirsty, and I'd already decided not to eat food because the food was bad.
Your hanger added to your.
Yep, and that's really how they get you. Because even though you know the food's gonna suck at the airport, like it's gonna be awful. If you're in a hurry or you're already at the airport and you're hungry, your options are go from hungry to hangry or eat whatever slop at whatever price and just suck it up.
Now, there's a second layer beyond the fact that you're trapped in the airport or on the airplane and there's no competition for food. So if you're hungry, your choices are be hungrier or pay.
Yep.
Right? The second layer is that because you are hungry, right? Hunger is the best spice. So they can give you a lower quality food, right? And you have this hunger spice that will, right? It's like they don't have to give you some fucking gourmet meal, right? For you to think that it's, better than it is because you were so hungry that it ends up, sort of improving your opinion of the food.
Yep. Right? But even then, it hasn't elevated that opinion above like 2 out of 10 on average.
No. I think the saddest thing is like, when like if you go to like the airport in New York and you try to get like a bagel with cream cheese, it's like it's worse than like some bagel from the middle of the country or so. It's like if they don't like, why don't you have a New York bagel here? It's like they just have the worst like steamed crappy bagel and like
or a lot of
charge you like $7 for it.
A lot of airports now are even worse. They'll have a bunch of different restaurants, but they're actually just branding on the same shared industrial kitchen, and the menu between all the restaurants
of course.
Yep. There's a few exceptions, and most of those exceptions are international terminals in non-US countries.
Right. I think the exceptions, at least in the United States, are actually surprisingly, right? the fast food, right?
Yeah.
In an airport, like in New York.
A McDonald's
right?
in the airport is the same food as the McDonald's outside of the
If
airport.
there's a McDonald's or a Shake Shack or a Wendy's or a Cinnabon or right, it's like whatever kind of fast food is in there. If you got a Chipotle in the airport, I don't fucking know, right? It's like they're gonna be mostly the same as the ones that aren't in the airport. And they're going to have their own kitchen that's separate from the other kitchens and their own employees, right? And like those are usually a safer bet in the US.
Now, I want you to internalize
a sit-down restaurant or,
Scott Rubin of Geek Nights has just said that there's a scenario where fast food like that might be the better option, and I agree with him.
Like 90% of the time I eat at a Shake Shack, it's the airport Shake Shack.
Yep. I have gotten a milkshake for breakfast at that Shake Shack at JFK on multiple occasions.
Right? It's like, how often do I go to, I can go to Shake Shack whenever the hell I want. How often do I go? Almost never.
Yeah,
right?
it's
Maybe
rare.
once. I can't remember. Maybe the last time I went to one was when I had a job and I was going in the office. No, I was actually recently, I was meeting some people from my previous job, and there's a Shake Shack downstairs at Grand Central now.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So we went down there and got milkshakes only.
The last time I ate at a Shake Shack outside of an airport was in March of 2019, before COVID, because a coworker wanted to eat there, and I wanted to talk to him about non-work stuff, so I went with him.
I went, I can't believe it's like I remember going when there was only one Shake Shack in Madison Square Park,
right?
And it was the only one, and I would wait in line and eat there.
I would wait in line too. Mostly the milkshake was the reason I was waiting in line because the burger was okay. The burger's actually not the worst burger.
The fries
their fries are okay, but
and now they're fucking everywhere. Like it's
so the other X factor in an airport. But this is only a privileged option that I only have been able to. Yep. And so here's the deal. If you don't fly, if you're not flying business class because of rewards from something or your company's paying for it, you're probably fucking up because it is so expensive. Why would you spend $10,000 to have a slightly nicer 6 hours on a flight? Like,
exactly. It's like, yes, is it uncomfortable in the back of the plane in some coach cheapo seat? Yes, but you know what? The plane goes at the same speed no matter what seat you're in. Right?
Now, I would say for super long flights, like if it was $10,000 to fly to Australia business class, considering a coach ticket was like $4,000, then I might pay that difference.
$6,000 is still like two computers.
Yeah, but that flight is not $10,000 to Australia. That flight, business class, is like $25,000 to $30,000. Right. That's a car.
That's a car, right? So it's like, would you rather have a car or would you rather be a little bit more comfortable for some number of hours? It's like the flight length is the same. So unless you are unseemingly wealthy, it's like I will put up with basically whatever discomfort there is, given the price difference.
Now, I will. The exception I'll make is I will almost.
Someone else is paying
on an international flight. If I'm paying, I'll almost always pay extra for that premium economy, like in the middle, because it
depends on the price difference.
Yeah, because usually it's like 1.5 to 2x more, and then business class is like 10x more, and then first class is like 30x more.
Yeah, if someone else is paying and they're not going to just like give me and they're not just gonna give me the money instead, and it's not like an option, then I'll take.
The airport lounge food is a thing where it's one of those traps where if you experience it enough, because like work lets you do it and like you only fly for work, the next time you go to an airport and you can't go into that lounge because you're not going to pay the ridiculous amount of money to have access to it, suddenly the airport feels so much shittier because the way those lounges work, they just have super good, completely free food. You can like order meals in a lot of them and they'll just bring it to you and it's great. Unlimited alcohol, unlimited drinks, snacks, waiters, a shower, but the food is like legit good. And I do always eat in the lounge if I'm flying for work, like on either end of my journey.
Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you, right? That if you don't eat there, that means that whoever paid for it, right?
Yep.
Paid the $10,000 for the ticket. That included in that price is the shower and the food.
Yeah.
And it's like if you don't take advantage of that, they're just keeping all that money.
Yep.
Right. And it's like even if you do take advantage of it, they're still profiting, right? Because the amount of they make so much money on the business tickets. That's where like the most of these revenues are, right? Because you think about the square footage of the plane, right? The amount of dollars per square foot, it's like it's all in the fanciest seats.
Yeah.
Right. That's where all the money is. That's who's paying for the plane to actually.
If the airlines in the U.S. could get away with just not having coach, they would try.
They would, yeah. If they thought they could fill the plane, also, right? Could you get that many people to pay the fancy price to fill the whole plane? Probably not, right? There aren't that many people who do that.
So the secret is get the free upgrade or have a program. Like I have enough points because all my work travel to where now I just have access to the lounges.
I always found it interesting that works like let employees keep all these points. Like if I was a work, it's like obviously I want to be pro labor because I'm such a nice person, but it's like I'd be like, hey, we're paying for these flights with a company credit card. Those points are on the company credit card, and we're going to use those points to get tickets for employees to fly. They don't belong to the employee to use for their own shit.
So one,
right? I might use them on you if you're still my employee and for your next flight.
I looked into this a little bit because we talked about it a while ago, and there's two factors at play. Factor one,
I'm not going to use it for like your family to go on vacation. I'll just pay you well enough that you can do that.
Factor one, the airlines don't let them do that. The points go to a human being. They don't go to a corporate account.
Fancy. Okay.
Partly because the airlines, they basically, if an airline or a code share gets you, business traveler, to put your business traveler loyalty program in when you fly for work, you're getting points on that airline. So when you fly for non-work, you're more likely to fly with that airline. The airlines profit. This is almost like advertising to wealthy people and like getting them to fly with you out of loyalty or whatever.
I would be happy to, would I be happier to have, I guess it's sort of be happy to have both, right? It's like a person who might change jobs to be loyal to my airline for their non-business travel. That's good. But having a company be loyal to me for all of the travel of all of their employees, that seems better, right?
Yeah. The other factor is that, I work in capital markets. I have spent, COVID kind of messed it up, a terrifying amount of time flying all around the world. I've been to like 20 countries. I've flown to London 40-ish times. I've flown to Singapore like 14 times. Like I fly a lot, and it's picking up again as COVID winds down. And if I didn't get points for that and they weren't putting me in business class, I would absolutely just refuse. It's a perk because companies want employees to travel because it sadly does lead to business that wouldn't otherwise happen. Like weirdly, I don't like that that's the way it is, but I've seen it happen firsthand for too long. But two, I just wouldn't like without that perk, I would not travel for work at all.
Well, then, if your employees are refusing to travel for business, you just have to give them more compensation.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure, if they gave me another couple $100,000 a year, I might be willing to fly coach.
But how much? But you'll do it for these points. How much are the points worth in money?
You know what the points are worth? Emily and I can fly business class for free when we go to Japan.
Right, but how much does that cost?
Fuck if I know. Who cares how these systems work? It just means
I'm saying is like if the cost of business class tickets to Japan is like $30,000, $20,000, right?
Yeah,
a car. So, but you just asked for $100,000 in a compensation boost. So the math doesn't line up there.
Yeah, because I just want more. But you know what? Remember how you'd always say, like I always said, oh, my flights were so cheap, but it was because I had so many points that I had status on Delta. So like check bags were always free for me. I didn't even know you had to pay for check bags because it was free because I had those points.
Yeah, well, you'd had to pay for check bags for quite a while. But
I have never had to pay for check bags anywhere I fly.
Check bags is really just a consequence of the internet flight.
Yep.
surge,
No,
right?
absolutely. That's a whole separate topic. And fuck that.
If it wasn't for that, that's the only reason they stopped including it is because the internet.
Yep.
So.
But to get back to the airplane food, what I can say is that there is a stark difference between the food on flights within a country. Like if we talk about America, even first class on the fanciest airline that's flying between two cities in America will just have garbage food most of the time, unless it's the second leg of an international
flight. If they have a food, it's going to be snack.
Yep. But even flying coach, like you book the cheapest ticket on like Delta to London from New York, the coach food is actually pretty good, like surprisingly good, and it's just part of the flight because that's a long enough flight, and because of the time zone difference flying over the ocean, you actually do kind of want a meal on a flight. And in fact, I would say eating the meals on long flights when the plane serves them will help you avoid jet lag. Like, and there's some studies that prove
you should
this.
Definitely eat when they give you the food.
Yep, if it's a meal like that, they're like, there's a breakfast at this time.
When they turn the lights off. Right?
Yep, the airlines
don't
worry
about where the sun actually is, right?
Yep.
When you're on the plane, if it's a long flight, you pretend that the lights on the plane are the sun.
Yep.
And
if the flight attendant's like, here's dinner, eat it if you're not hungry. If the flight attendant's like, dinner's not for an hour and you're hungry, wait that hour and eat then. Don't eat early.
Yep. But yet, I think the other thing is that, it's just a part of the problem is that we live in the United States, which, the food here is not as good as a lot of other places.
Because I got to tell you, Turkish Airlines, holy shit, the food in premium economy on Turkish Airlines was better than like restaurants I paid a lot of money for in New York to eat at.
Right. It's like if you go to another country, right, that actually has food with flavor in it.
Or I'll tell you what, I used to fly coach to India a lot because my other company wasn't as fancy in that regard. And even booking like Air India or something in like the worst possible coach seat, and like there isn't even a cushion on the seat, like I can feel the bar through it. It's just miserable.
Oh, wow.
The rice, good. It was bad. But the food was great. That biryani I ate on that plane was fantastic.
Like if you fly to Japan, I'm sure you can get like some great sushi on that flight.
Yeah.
And if you fly to Florida, you can't get any sushis, not even a shitty convenience store one.
But I guess the big secret I'd share is that flying internationally, in my long experience doing this, coach food's pretty good generally when you're flying internationally. Business class and up food is like
fancy restaurant food.
It's literally like, here's your 5-course meal, like, but the sommelier brings you a wine bottle. It's like, it's kind of nuts. It's fancier than I eat, even in fancy times on my own.
Yep.
But premium economy on those kinds of planes is like the magic sweet spot because you get like a more limited version of the business class menu. You don't get the coach food. You get like the waiter and the metal knife and the for-real food on most airlines in premium economy if you're traveling between countries or over an ocean. Like, it's good food.
Yeah.
I should post one of the menus. Like, I literally, on my most recent flight back from Frankfurt, I had a 6-course meal over the course of 2 hours on the flight. It was nuts.
Well, that'll help you distract you from any discomfort you have, right?
Exactly. I mean, discomfort, it was business class. When I was tired, I closed the door to my pod and laid flat in my actual bed that had a comforter.
But I mean, that's still not as good as a real bed, right?
No.
It's still, it's just way, way better than a seat with no legs.
A seat that leans back 1.5 degrees.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's all relative though, right? It's like, that's what I'm saying is like, in the airport, the captive audience, the limited choice, right? The hunger, right? The all that, right? Makes you judge everything in a completely different way.
Lock me in a tube for 12 hours with no access to anything, and then come to me with a McDonald's hamburger 6 hours in. There is a decent chance I'm going to eat that thing, and I'll be mad about it, but I'll eat it. Right.
And the fact that a lot of the price is either, is often either hidden or not hidden from you based on the circumstances, right? So, that 5-course meal when you're in business class, you're like, I just get this. It's like, well,
you paid $15,000 for this flight.
Right. It's like, if you realize that 5-course meal that you're getting, that's really good, cost you $5,000. Suddenly it doesn't taste so good.
Nope.
Right? You would never, and even if you could have a restaurant on the ground that would serve you a meal twice as good, you wouldn't pay $5,000.
I mean, in New York City, if you spend $500 on a meal, that is some of the best food you will ever have in your life. You can't get much better than that.
Nope, not at all. Right?
Hell, a $50 meal in New York City is some fucking amazing food.
Exactly. So it's like, you don't realize that, like, on the one hand, you're like, oh, it's amazing. It's like, no, when you remember that you spent so much money on it, that's actually a terrible value. It's like the worst.
Like,
you might have better value back in Coach just shelling out the extra 20 when they come around to get the special meal.
Yup.
Value wise, that might actually be better, even though obviously it doesn't taste as good. But $20 of like, some microtransaction to get an extra sandwich is better than $5,000 a $500 meal. So
Yep. So I guess our moral is, broadly, context matters.
yeah,
I think we can stop there. We've gone on for an hour and 15 minutes.
Food is unique because airlines and airplanes are a unique situation, right?
And also, food is required for life. You can only go so long without it. And like we talked about being hangry, if you're hungry and it's been like a couple hours that you've been hungry, I'm not even talking about starvation and like the horrors of existence. If you're hungry and you remain hungry for 4 hours, that puts even the most good-natured human in an increasingly stabby state.
Especially if their name is Rim.
I ain't even the most hangry type of person in our friend group, but I'm up there. I'm in the top quadrant at least.
You're way up there, especially if you are hangry and you have to wait for something. Then
Yep.
you're like double.
I mean, I'm the kind of person, if I want some coffee and I walk into a coffee shop and there's even one person in line, I kind of just give up and go to the next coffee shop.
That's right.